Hi everyone, welcome to Castle Lovestead. Today I'm doing Friday reads. So in my last video I talked about how I'm not sure how I want to break up my videos talking about what I read, whether I want to do monthly wrap-ups by subject matter, or Friday reads, so I'm just going to do it all. So this is my Friday reads for March 26th. What I gather about Friday reads is you're supposed to talk about what you've read during the week. So the Dysthymia Diaries, True Stories of Living with Dysthymia and Finding Help and Hope by Robin Wheeler. I was diagnosed with dysthymic disorder in 2012 by my former psychiatrist, who I loved, by the way. I'm not going to share the story as a means of like bad-mouthing my psychiatrist. She was excellent. I loved her. So anyway, I was diagnosed with dysthymic depression in 2012. And from there, the treatment methods and the ways that I was thinking about my dysthymia was the same vein as major depressive disorder. And that was how I proceeded for the past 9 years. Well, my psychiatrist retired and I have a new psychiatrist. And in our first session, he said, "Hold up, Jessica." Like, you are talking about your depression in the same way that someone with major depressive disorder talks about it and cognates about it. You have dysthymic depression. That is a different diagnosis. It functions differently. And that like blew my mind a little bit. Like, I've been functioning the past decade thinking that I have major depressive disorder, which is what everybody thinks when they think about depression. Like, every time someone talks about depression, they talk about major depressive disorder. But I have dysthymic depression, and in the DSM-5 it's now called persistent depressive disorder. And basically what that means is that my depression is chronic. Every single day of my life, for the rest of my life, I'm going to function with an undercurrent of sadness, hopelessness, numbness, etc. And it's because of the way my brain developed. Experiences that I had in early childhood, the environment I lived in early childhood developed my brain in this way that I am going to experience depression every day of my life. And so the way that you think about it and the way that you cope with it is going to be different from major depressive disorder, where major depressive disorder is what everybody thinks about with depression, where someone is really, really low for 2 weeks. Editor Jess popping in here. The reason that I emphasize 2 weeks for a diagnosis of major depressive disorder is because for a diagnosis of dysthymic depression or persistent depressive disorder, you have to have had experiences of symptoms every single day for a minimum of 2 years. So at minimum 2 years of symptoms every single day. And when I was diagnosed in 2012, I had been experiencing symptoms since I was 5 years old or more, and they get really low, they can't function, maybe have suicidal ideation, and then the treatment helps them pull out of that, put their symptoms in remission, but then they will have recurrences of that throughout their life, where they'll have periods of remission and then periods of being depressed. And that is not dysthymia. Dysthymia is zero remission. Dysthymia is you are always depressed, sometimes more so than others, but you're going to live your life with low grade depression. Now, psychiatrists, I learned from my psychiatrist, he said psychiatrists call dysthymia mild, not in that the symptoms of depression are mild, but that dysthymia is mild compared to illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So the symptoms of depression aren't necessarily mild. It's mild compared to other more severe disorders. People with dysthymia are much more likely to attempt suicide. People with dysthymia are much more likely to struggle to keep a job. It is a much more damaging form of depression because our symptoms never let up. And the reason that I'm sharing this is because I really want to destigmatize mental illness. I want to be able to talk about mental illness in the same way we talk about like catching the common cold. And the only way to do that is to talk about mental illness casually and openly, and have lots of people doing that. So I'm doing that here today, and like, I don't care who knows this information. It is what it is. It is who I am. Anyway, since he brought this up recently, that like, I need to start thinking about my depression differently than I would if I had major depressive disorder, I've been trying to find resources to learn more about it. And there is very little out there. Like, there's not many books out there. And like, I'm not just going to go on YouTube and watch any bloke's video for my mental health care. Like, no. So I've been trying to find good, like, solid sources, and there's very, very little. So one of them was this book, the Dysthymia Diaries. The book was okay. So it starts out basically explaining what dysthymia is. And one thing that was helpful from the opening was that it breaks dysthymia down into two types, the anxious type and the depressive type. And I'm definitely the anxious type. So that was helpful to learn about and learn something new from this book, which that's probably the only new thing that I learned from this book. Then the second part of this book goes into people's personal stories about living with dysthymia. And I see what Robin Wheeler was trying to do here. She was trying to share other stories so that you could feel connected to them and see yourself in these stories. But it was people who aren't really writers writing their story about living with depression their whole life. Like, I attempted suicide when I was 5 years old, and etc. And for me, it just wasn't helpful. Like, I have also lived with depression since I was 5 years old. I don't need to read about it. Like, I know how it works. So for that reason, I didn't read it, and that is just a personal preference. But another writing perspective on this was that the people who shared their stories weren't really writers, and so it kind of felt like reading people's high school personal narrative essays. Not to say that these people aren't smart or anything like that, they're just not writers. I think it would have been better had Robin Wheeler interviewed them and written those stories herself, so that there's narrative consistency. But whatever. The third part of the book was Robin Wheeler explaining some strategies and suggestions that have worked for her in dealing with her own depression. And like, girlfriend, come on. So it was basically like, so you're feeling sad? Have you tried not being sad? Like, really? So the suggestions were like, manage your stress, count your blessings, maintain your friendships, and like, nah, like, that was very not great advice. None of it was like clinical methods. It was all just her coping, like her own coping strategies. I would have much preferred a little bit of research done on clinical strategies for dealing with dysthymia than hearing about her own personal strategies. And then the third part of the book was worksheets, and that's probably the most helpful part of the Dysthymia Diaries, where it's these worksheets. So they're like worksheets on different cognitive distortions, worksheets on time management, goal setting, etc. But you could easily find all these worksheets with a Google search. You didn't necessarily need to purchase a whole book for the worksheets. So I feel terrible talking about this book in this way, because Robin Wheeler actually says in the book, like, she struggles with self-esteem, but one of the ways she feels good about herself is knowing that she's a published author. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad saying this, but I didn't like the book. I appreciated the attempt. Like, I appreciate the attempt to help others. I appreciate the intention to connect people who are struggling with this in a world where there are so few resources for us. I love that. I just don't think it was well executed. So 2 stars out of 5. and I feel really bad about that rating. But it didn't land for me. I didn't really find it that helpful. But Robin, girl, if you want some advice on how to write a really solid book, improve things moving forward so that you can write the book that people need, hit me up. I would be happy to give you some tips on how to continue to produce what you're trying to produce. Next, I read The Witching Flower by Samantha Silver. This is a cozy mystery. I am just getting into cozy mysteries. I have a group of friends that I read with every Friday night for reading sprints. Please join us sometime. And they're like really saying that I would love the genre. And like when I am feeling really low, I do like some good cozy escapism. So definitely giving the genre a chance. I've read 3 so far. One was Granny's Got a Gun by Harper Lynn, and I really liked it. I thought it was hilarious. The second one was Candy Coated Murder by Kate Bell, which I DNF'd. I talk about that in my last video. And then this was the third one, The Witching Flower by Samantha Silver, and it was fine. Like it was cozy. It's exactly what a cozy mystery is. So this is about what's her name? I don't even remember the main character's name, but the main character lives in Minneapolis. Her adopted parents have died. She was working a crappy job. She gets this random letter saying that, hey, your biological mother just passed and she's left you her bakery and your inheritance. Come run the shop. So she moves to a small town in Washington called Spelford Cove, and also learns that she is a witch. So she like meets all of her biological family. They're like, oh yeah, you're a witch. And you know, it's supposed to be fun and lighthearted, and that it was fun and lighthearted. The witch part, the magic system, I thought was kind of cool. It was also very convenient. Like it very conveniently allows her to escape certain situations. So, you know, from a writing perspective, kind of lazy, but it's fine. And I like the book overall. I think the one thing that I didn't love was like when the main character ends up solving the mystery, the murder that happens, there's not really any explanation of how she solves the mystery. She just one day is like, oh, I know who did it. The end. Like, there's no explanation. Like, how did you come to that conclusion, lady? There's no explanation of that. She just knows. Like, what? I think that was the weakest part of the book, is that she just knew. She just figured it out. No explanation about how she figured it out. She just knew. So, yeah, I thought that was really a weak point in the book. But overall, like, when it comes to the genre, fits the genre as far as what I know about cozy mysteries. Now, being someone who's fairly new to reading cozy mysteries, maybe later on down the road after I've read more, I will lower my star rating of this book, or who knows. But I did rate it 3 stars out of 5. Again, like, I don't feel super qualified to be able to give a star rating to cozies because I am so new to them still. But that's what I gave that one, 3 stars out of 5. One thing that I liked about it was I kind of am obsessed with this idea of people uprooting themselves and starting their lives completely over. And I think that was what I liked most about this particular book, was getting to see how the main character, who had no family, no friends, dead-end job, just uprooted herself and moved to this new community and like started her life over from scratch. I really like that idea of just starting life completely over, and I think that's what I like most about The Witching Flower. Okay, the last book I've been working on is Emma by Jane Austen. I'm doing a buddy read of this with Becca, and I'll leave Becca's channel link in the description box, but I'm pretty close to being finished with this. We are scheduled to finish by the 30th of this month. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot with this is that, you know, Jane Austen is thought to be this standard of feminism in her day. And with this particular book, I think a lot of people are like, Emma doesn't want to get married. Yeah, feminist. And I don't think that's really what is happening here. So there's a scene in volume 1 where Emma's taking a walk with Harriet, and Harriet's like, do you want to get married? And Emma's like, oh, no, I do not want to get married. And the only reason that she can say that comfortably is because she's rich. If she was not rich, she would have had to get married in order to survive. And there's like a quote here on page 69. Someone's banging around next door. There's a quote here on page 69 that kind of backs that up. So she says, never mind, Harriet, I shall not be a poor old maid. And it is poverty only which makes celibacy contemptible to a generous public. A single woman with a very narrow income must be a ridiculous, disagreeable old maid. The proper sort of boys and girls, but a single woman of good fortune is always respectable and may be as sensible and pleasant as anybody else. And the distinction is not quite so much against the candor and common sense of the world as appears at first, for a very narrow income has a tendency to contract the mind and sour the temple. Those who can barely live, and who live perforce in a very small and generally very inferior society, may well be illiberal and cross. So I think that this book is more a commentary on social class than anything, because where Emma tends to experience like her heartbreak and her struggle is in this idea of the different people in her town crossing social boundaries in terms of social class and standing in their romantic relationships, like trying to get Harriet into a higher class than she currently is, getting really upset if someone marries down. And it's like, it really reflects that, like, at this particular time, England basically had a caste system of nobility versus peasants, right? So I don't think this is so much a comment on like girl power as it is about really breaking down that social construct of class systems and how that really causes a lot of heartache and hardship for people. That seems to be the biggest commentary so far that I'm really picking up on here, is that those social constructs are pretty broken even in the time that people were living them. And the only reason that Emma could stay single is because she was rich. All right, that'll do it for today's Friday reads. I feel like I've talked quite a long time here. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If not, you don't have to watch the next one. Anyway, that will do it for today's Friday reads. So until next time, make sure that you continue to read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.